Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. My name is Christina Rico, and I am the Executive Director of BCDC here at the BPDA. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lizzie Turek, Special Staff to BCDC. Before we begin with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, Commissioners Eastley, Evans, Lubenow, Morris, and Solano are present. Anybody I've missed? Great. With that, and unless we have any questions or comments from the commissioners, we are ready to for the first proponent team to begin their presentation. We're going to hear first tonight from the proposed project at Warren Towers at Boston University Charles River campus, associated with their 2013 to 2023 IMP extension. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the design committee following a presentation to the full commission earlier this month on March 5th. And it's my understanding that Commissioner Solano has recused from review. Are there any others that I may have missed? Great. Hearing and seeing none, we would invite the proponent team to go ahead and initiate their presentation. Just a quick heads up that it's a 10-minute presentation. We'll give you a halftime and a 2-minute warning before commissioners begin discussion. I'll turn it over to the proponent team.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Sonia Richards, Associate VP of Planning, Design, and Construction here at BU. We have a lot of information to go over today, so I'm going to quickly turn this presentation over to Stephen Thomas of Miller Dyer Spears and Jim Haru of Copley Wolf. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Stephen Thomas with Miller Dyer Spears. Just make sure I'm not muted. Good. And I'm joined with Jim Haru with Copley Wolf. We're here to show you the Boston University's Warren Towers project, and specifically our designs within the public realm on Commonwealth Avenue and the exterior of the towers. The primary goal of the project is to evolve Warren Towers to meet the contemporary needs for energy, sustainability, and a residential learning community. This is achieved through the various project goals we've listed on this slide. As mentioned, this presentation will be focused on the public realm, which will touch upon the accessibility goals and the evolution of the building's exterior design for those contemporary needs by improving the building performance, enhancing the student experience, and invigorating its aesthetic appearance. But first, a little context and history about the building itself. Warren Towers has a long history and a large presence in both scale and function. Built in the 60s and designed in the international style by Philadelphia architecture firm von Storck and Berkovich, the towers were a response to BU's needs for a booming student population. It became and still is the largest residence hall in Boston, housing 1,800 students, and it is the second largest in the country. Warren Towers plays a pivotal role in the first-year undergraduate student experience, and it plays a central role to the campus by providing dining services, garage parking, and several retail spaces along Commonwealth Avenue. Along the larger urban corridor campus of BU, Warren Towers' location is shown in this diagram to illustrate its important position near the center for student activity, and also its important adjacency to nearby programs within BU's central campus framework and the public realm, which Jim with Copley Wolf will now tell you about. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Stephen. An important part of the Warren Tower renovation project includes the renovation to the existing 21-foot wide public realm along Commonwealth Avenue that runs between Cummington Mall to the west and Hinsdale Mall to the east. And this is all to correct the ADA shortcomings of the walkway and each of the building entrances. I'm sure everyone knows where this is, but for context, this just shows the adjacent programs to Warren Towers, including the very important BU East Green Line stop and the recent addition of the Data Science Center. Next slide. The bottom drawing here, it basically, this drawing highlights the ADA shortcomings. Each entry and egress at the building today does not meet ADA standards. It's either a slope to get in, or a step or several steps, or a combination of them to get into entrances. And color coded, you'll see that the public accessible spaces, the retail and the building lobby, are illustrated in sort of a tan or a red color. The mechanical space is in gray, which does not require ADA access. Although in part of the process in providing ADA access, we probably will get ADA access to those locations as well. Next slide. The red arrows at the bottom shows where we do have to get ADA access, which, as I just mentioned, does not have it. In order to do that, we have to raise the grades along portions of the public realm. And in doing that, we're going to be adding some raised granite planters that match the existing ones that's found all along Commonwealth Avenue along the BU campus. So we're basically matching that, and the bottom drawing shows where we will be needing to add those, that new planter, and then extending a second planter. The top drawing, which is an illustrative drawing, shows the new planters with new trees in it, and that's those same locations. And by raising the grades in those areas, we'll be able to get the access to those retail spaces. At the northwest corner by Cummington Mall, we'll be adding a raised pedestrian crossing from one side of the street to the next. That will allow the mitigation of the steep grades, not only to the retail space that's actually in that public realm on Common Ave, but also a small retail space on Cummington Mall as well. The furnishing zone at the street edge will be edged with a permeable brick paving border, and it'll match the one to the east and west of the site. We will replace the multiple bike racks with BU standards and Boston approved hoop racks, maintaining the 44 bike count, and reinstalling the blue bike stations that are there now, along with all the other amenities that exist along that property line. The section that Stephen just pulled up shows the generous 13-foot wide pedestrian zone up against the building, the 7-foot wide raised granite planters, and which will have a steel plank guard matching the BU standard found on both sides of Com Ave. Next one. This section here is taken where the planters do not exist, mainly at the mid-block area. It shows the full 21-foot plus walk along with the building entry, where many of the bike racks are located, as well as the blue bike station. Next one. This is a quick illustration taken where the planters don't exist, or where the planters existing, and it illustrates that permeable paving edge, again, which matches the one just north, just east and west of the site. And this one here shows the wide pedestrian zone, which has the bike lanes at the mid-block zone, which is the main crossing over to the BU East T-stop. And from here, Stephen will take you to the updates to the towers.
And I'd just like to let the proponent team know that you've reached the halfway point of your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Turning back to the building, I will show you the proposed scope of the exterior work to support the energy efficiency goals to provide an all-electric building. Pictured here is the existing building with its existing penthouses in gold, and the proposed the tower roofs will be densely populated by equipment and new penthouses to facilitate the all-electric HVAC system that we'll be putting in place. None of the equipment or rooftop structures will be taller than the existing elevator penthouse. The 7-foot tall roof screen will be provided to partially conceal the equipment, and the ribbon of the roof screen will be interrupted at regular intervals to facilitate window cleaning. The height of the tower roof screens are limited by height, by structural limitations and mechanical equipment airflow. On the podium roofs, the existing penthouses are being removed. New equipment is being located on the roof but pushed to the south side away from Commonwealth Ave and to avoid trying to obstruct too many of the student views from their bedrooms. Equipment will be housed on the low terrace roof, heat pumps and so forth, and surrounded by a new screen wall that acts as both a visual screen and acoustic barrier screen. And this is a metal panel assembly wall. With the evolution of our proposed envelope enhancements, these are relative to the windows and their adjacent construction. This slide quickly illustrates the existing proposed conditions with color highlights for new work. When evaluating the existing conditions of the tower, we found numerous failures, failing glass block, tilting parapets, spalling concrete. Studying how to repair these conditions, we found it best to eliminate the concrete overhangs to prevent their inherent thermal bridging, as well as the prolonged maintenance that just simply repairing them would provide. And then to repair the brick piers, which are supported by rusting relieving angles, we realized we would need to demolish at least half of the brick pier just to repair and replace the relieving angles. The glass blocks could not be replaced in kind because they have poor thermal performance and would fail again. The design team concluded that the intense time and effort required to make the repairs to a facade that was designed to fail was not in the best interest of BU's anticipated schedule. The results of our repair studies provide several opportunities on different fronts. The proposed envelope design could improve not just the thermal performance of a large area of the wall, but it could also offer an improved experience from inside the student rooms by expanding their sightlines and field of view to the exterior, while also giving Boston University an opportunity to invigorate the exterior perception and presence of the towers. We were interested to see how we could use the beveled spandrels to evolve and modernize the appearance of the towers. We studied these elements to brighten and lighten the facade while adding some warmth via color. In study A, we started with very regular patterns. In study B, we studied staggered patterns, and we settled on our currently proposed arrangement, which creates a pattern that has a rhythm that gradually expands upward, reinforcing the verticality of the towers with a subtle sense of movement. This movement intends to open up the perceived proportion of the metal surrounds as they rise up from the podium volume. These rhythms would be carried around to the north facade. Within the perceived larger opening of the metal panel surrounds, we're also proposing a secondary level of detail with the window mullion patterns. The patterns alternate as they go up the building from opening to opening and across the building from bay to bay. The materials illustrated in this slide are all of a warm color tone to complement the existing warm brick. Warm grays for the window framing, a warm spandrel panel, clear triple E glazing, and the warm coppery color of the panels, which have a nice kind of luster to them, as well as an ombre effect on the building as the light catches it and moves across the panel. And I'll move through some exterior views that we have. Left existing photograph, and on the right is the existing photograph again, but with our rendered new elements implanted into the photograph, so that you see what it looks like with the existing brick for the windows, the metal panels, the roof screens, and the roof equipment. That was a view from the east. This is a view from the west at midday. This is a view from Arundel Street across the pike. Here you can see the massing of the roof equipment and screens. This is a view from Cambridge and across the river. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you to the proponent team. We can open it up for discussion here.
I think this is the first time I'm seeing this project. Thank you for your presentation. It was very, very clear. Could you bring up an image that shows a little bit more of the context? The slides you showed are very much focused on the detail. So if I understand it correctly, we are addressing two concerns here at BCDC or within our purview. One is what is happening within the public realm at the street level in terms of navigating a little bit of a change, I guess, I'm not sure, change in elevation, change in grade to provide ADA access. Is that correct?
That's
And
correct.
then changes to the exterior of the building, including adding rooftop equipment and effectively a parapet or a screen to shield it, and then changes to the exterior of the building, likewise to address improvements in relationship to energy efficient around windows and changing some of the detailing of the facade. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And do you have a actually before we look at this one, so I guess I'm and I'll let some of my other my fellow colleagues weigh in. I'm in part wondering all of the views that you're showing us are kind of, I haven't had a chance to pull up Google Maps yet. So just looking at it primarily from Commonwealth Avenue, I appreciated that distant view that you showed us with kind of the building as it appears in the skyline. I guess the question is, are there any implications for views or facades other than along Commonwealth Avenue? And that's the question I have about context. And then in respect to the details of the changes that you're making at the public realm, how I'm still having trouble interpreting where those changes are. If you could bring up that plan again, you know, where as a pedestrian would I be navigating changes to address the ADA access? And I apologize, maybe I missed something along the way here. Okay, those are the slopes and steps.
Yeah, we ran through it rather quickly just to hit that time limit, but we are rebuilding effectively the public realm on Commonwealth Avenue in front of the building, from Cummington Mall, which you can see on the left, to Hinsdale on the right. Not only is each entrance to the building, each entrance egress to the building, non-ADA standard by today's standards. You know, basically it's either sloped, stepped, or a little bit of both. The cross pitch on the sidewalk in many locations violates the Boston standard of being less than 2%, but they like to be less than that just for tolerance purposes. So in all instances, it does not meet ADA standards.
Okay, and actually, could you also, and again, I apologize, I was not at the initial presentation of this project. Can you or one of the BPDA staff address the concerns, or just slightly, you know, review the concerns that were raised at the BCDC review?
Regarding the grades or the renovations, are you asking?
Yeah, which
just typically when this comes to, this was presented at full commission, correct?
Yes, so Anne Marie, this was presented 2
Yes.
weeks ago. And we suggested that the BU team bring the Warren Towers portion to us back quickly, because they are trying to get this project underway, and so we appreciate them being able to get into this slot. But the question about the kind of overall comments that were shared at that meeting, I think Christina might be able to help us with. I asked her a similar question just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to dig up the verbatim transcript before being able to respond to that, Commissioner Easley, via chat. But I believe some of this information, particularly what's going on in the public realm, is new material that's presented. I believe, Ken, please correct me if I'm wrong, newly created since your presentation at the monthly meeting. But it would be helpful if you could summarize what aspect of this presentation is responding to those comments that you heard at the March 5th meeting.
Yeah, Jim, if you don't mind us being able to walk through, I think this particular image here, I mean, a lot of
sure.
depending on the existing ground plane is existing out there today with some minor modifications made to it in order to address those ADA concerns. So some of those flower beds that you see are existing. But Jim, if you could walk through
Yeah,
where
yeah.
those are going to be extended, where the trees are coming into play.
Yeah, and again, I apologize because we had to run through it so quickly, but um, as I said, we are correcting the cross pitch on the walk to meet those ADA standards. In doing so, we are going to remove the entire sidewalk, put it back in locations. We are modifying the curb slightly in a few locations. We will be putting in the permeable edging that you can see in red, which matches the block to the east and west of this site. The raised granite planters that exist there today, we will be dismantling and putting back in place, refreshing the ground level planting, retaining all the trees except for the 3 trees that are of a slight different color. And those 3 trees are in new raised planting beds, matching the existing ones that are in place, which you actually do find on both sides of Comm Ave. And there currently are trees in those locations, but they're planted actually in the sidewalk and modifying the grades of the sidewalk to get the ADA access to the retail spaces. By adding those planters, it's allowing us to manipulate the grades in those zones. So as a perk, those trees should be much happier in a raised planter than it is planted in the sidewalk as it is. There are currently about 44 bike parking spaces, is slightly less right now. We'll be removing all the bike racks and installing the BU standard, and it's a Boston approved hoop rack, cleaning up sort of a mishmash of bike racks along that zone, and getting up to the 44 bike count is actually slightly more than what's there now. And putting back all the other things that you normally find in a furnishing zone, the signage, the bus stop, the trash, recycling receptacles, all that material back in place where it exists today. And and the benches as well. So basically everything that's there today, we will be removing, putting back in place, cleaning it up, and it will be fresh sidewalk put in at the ADA approved standards. And another thing we're adding is that, as I mentioned, at Cummington Mall, to the upper left-hand corner of the drawing, we will actually be raising the entire intersection. So there will be a smooth pedestrian crossing from one side of Cummington to the other. And the reason we're doing that is because probably one of the worst spots for ADA access is that northwest corner of the building, where in order to get it to be that level, we need to raise it a full 6 inches plus. So as Ken said, it's going to look very much as it does today. It's concrete paving with the permeable edge and the raised planters, just more of them, and cleaning up the bike rack condition.
And I guess, how does that compare to the sidewalks and condition, the public realm condition on adjoining properties that you are sort of replacing in kind, addressing ADA issues? It seems like there's still a good bit of effort and no doubt cost that's going into this. And I'm just wondering if there are other opportunities, other opportunities that might be, addressed as part of this process as a whole. Is this it sounds like it's meeting the minimum requirements, but are there opportunities to further enhance the realm, the public realm around it, or to create a sense of continuity along this area of Commonwealth Avenue?
Well, pertaining to continuity, immediately to the east and west, it is marching in place. It's not only just replacing in kind what's there, but it's also matching what's immediately east and west. Stepping across the street on the other side of Comm Ave, there's quite an array of different type of conditions, and probably most evident of that is the data center. There's a very, very generous public zone, pedestrian zone, a completely different furnishing zone. And if you go down toward Kenmore Square, you'll find actually the entire sidewalk is brick, which does not meet Boston accessibility standards. So not, and, you know, you heard Stephen mention there's 1,800 students here, so it's quite a thoroughfare. So it's even though there's retail space, it probably doesn't lend itself very well to a frontage zone, like having cafe seating up against the building, that type of thing. So probably for the type of population and probably the demographic that's here, I think this is probably the appropriate response, considering we're working with an existing building. I think that's probably the best I can describe it to be.
Yeah.
Is that fair, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yes, it is.
really appreciate you taking a look at this full block and trying to imagine how to improve that public realm. And I know when we talked about it on March 5th, we had asked for a little bit more detail, so appreciate that. From my understanding, you know, right now the idea is to keep the existing crosswalk locations and to essentially bring the sidewalk for this block up to essentially dissolve some of those ADA challenges. And I'm still trying to understand then, you know, almost at the planter locations, is that where the sidewalk, the furnishing zone begins to slope down to the curb or to the actual street right of way? Is that where the grade change happens? Or is the curb itself taller?
In some locations, the curb will be modified. We actually put together a BTD diagram. Probably PTD is going to ask exactly those questions.
Okay.
So
Okay.
not the entire length is an issue. It's really the biggest issue is at some of these retail spaces and that mid-block area. As a result of making some of these changes, even one of the retail spaces at the Basho retail space, for instance, there's 2 doors to going in. One door will remain inaccessible. You don't need that door. I think the architects are studying whether or not that can just go away. And the second door, which we can make accessible, which is right by that new planter where we could actually raise it and pick up the grades, that will be the new front door to that retail space. Because of the length of that planter, we were able to modify the east-west pitch. So even though the cross pitch is where it should be, 1.5% thereabouts, the east-west pitch varies anywhere from 0.5% to 3%, which is perfectly accessible from ADA standards. And that's one of the reasons for adding these planters. Where it's the worst, we're adding these planters and lengthening the transition, let's say, from the door to the curb. Nonetheless, we still need to modify the curb in a few locations, which we will be going over with the BTD people, I think, next week.
Can you point just with your cursor or maybe even the zoom marker where the main doors are into the res hall versus the, okay.
Right there. Yep. That's
because
one. Go ahead.
Because one thought that I have, so I actually have had 2 brothers who have lived in Warren Towers
and my wife
in their BU careers. So I remember visiting, and one thing that I certainly remember from that, but of course more recently just being in this district, is that those doors, the doors into the res hall, are very congested. And so I wanted to make sure that the planter was not kind of narrowing the sidewalk too much there in order. Yeah. Okay. And it looks like you're breaking the planter. So it's that one location where it's red, right?
Stephen, could you zoom in on that area a little bit more? Sorry, I'm not driving.
Yeah, I can do. I need to pop out of presentation mode real quick, but let me get into it. Come on. There we go.
Yeah. So you can see there is an existing planter there. We're not modifying that planter. It's staying exactly where it is. And you're absolutely correct. There's actually 3 sets of double doors, which, flush the building at that point. And they immediately head to the right, where the main crossing at mid-block is to the BU East T-stop. In terms of the patterns of students, like where they go, you can see they come out and probably the majority of the students head to the right to cross the
Right, to cross Comm Ave there.
as quick as in Granby Street. And honestly, Granby Street, it's a this is I'm sure a broader discussion with traffic control, et cetera, but Granby actually comes across at that mid block as well. So there's a signaling probably challenge that they have to keep things safe. In a way, it's a broader discussion in terms of like what's the best way of doing, because I know it's quite dangerous going through here. As I said, both my wife and her brother went to BU and lived in this building a short time. And being a biker, I always have a little bit white knuckled coming through here myself. So it's a challenge.
It is a challenge. Yeah, and even looking at this enlargement that you've got up on the screen now, it's a combination of kind of a raised bed and then canopy trees kind of planted.
And
right.
that gray bar between those 2 trees right by the entry, that's where the current blue bike station is. As you probably know through all the projects you look at throughout the month. Managing bikes, blue bike stations, bike lanes, etc. It's an evolving situation always. I'm not going to say that this bike lane won't evolve to be something else. We did the work west of the BU Bridge, and that's a raised condition, which is terrific.
Yeah, that's an important point, Jim. I mean, we are in close coordination with the city of Boston as they look at this corridor for future bike safety improvements. The number 57 is being studied extensively along Commonwealth Avenue. So nothing that we're doing here is going to preclude or get in the way of being able to work with the city on improvements as it relates to bike safety. But yeah, an important note on that front.
And I wanted to just add a few comments on the building itself, but I don't want to preclude any other of the landscape or streetscape comments from commissioners before I do that.
And just to be clear too, Linda, you can see in the right-hand edge that where the 2 darker green trees are, that is the brand new raised planter.
Right.
So that's one of the worst spots to mitigate the grades. And to the left, off to the left of the screen, that green one, that planter is being extended, about 30 feet or so, again, to help mitigate the grades to get clear access to that retail space and the entry to the building. The rest of them, once we raise the crossing at Cummington Mall, that should resolve the issue. But there is a slight curb modification along that edge too, which is documented in the BTD document that we'll review next week with them.
Okay, great. Did any other commissioners want to talk about the streetscape before we move on to the
I'm happy to move to the building.
Okay, Jonathan, thanks. So I know when we had our May 5th meeting, there were several comments from David and Kathy and Kirk and Bill Ron as well about that, particularly about the windows. And I appreciate you describing a little bit of the evolution of how you got to those forms. Sonia is laughing. I'm sure that was a very long process internally.
Yes.
Yes.
A couple of the comments that I'd love to hear a little bit more about that were raised 2 weeks ago had to do with the color of the glass. It's quite dark here. And also to talk a little bit about the kind of the choice of, I think that you were describing it today as almost the copper color or patina around that glazing. So, and also the decision to essentially take it into what I think is a 4-story patterning. So I'm hoping that we can dive back into those questions from a couple of weeks ago, and you can walk us through some of that, including some of those concerns.
Certainly. The glass will be a triple glazed low E glass. It will be clear. It won't be as dark as shown in these renderings. I think that's just the drawback to renderings, but the anticipated color palette is this, with a clear low E glass and warmer color tones for the metal framing around the windows, and then the warmer color tones around in the metal panel surrounds. We were attracted to the metal panels because we wanted to add color to the facade, give it a little more visual interest, reinvigorate it, as well as with the shape, just kind of opened up the views from within, because before it was very, very confined views out of the windows. So, the goal is to kind of add more visual interest to the building with that warmer color, because the brick itself is very neutral. It's very tan. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's difficult to work with, you might say. But finding warmer color tones of metal panels and window framing, I think, will help kind of give the building a little more life, and bring it to a more kind of contemporary presence in BU's campus. The size of the openings, as I said, we looked at some regular rhythms that opened up that grid of the original structure of the original openings, and then we shifted to a staggered appearance. We were concerned that might be a little too random, so we went back to this ordered proposed arrangement. Let me go back to the presentation mode so it's more full on the screen. And here we decided to still have a regular rhythm, but just expand it as the tower rises, just to kind of enhance the verticality of the towers and give it some kind of a playful or subtle movement going up the building. That was really, go ahead.
And Stephen, can you describe the actual window framing? So it's helpful to know that the glass will not be as dark as this. And I would encourage you, when you come back to full commission, to show that as more of a clear glass, because I think that'll make a big difference. But I'm curious both about whether the individual, I don't know if we can go back to the zoom in of, yes. So is all of the glass here the same clear tint? Because it looks like you have a almost greener horizontal. Exactly.
We do have a spandrel glass.
Okay.
Yeah, that's at every floor level. So we alternate from spandrel glass at the majority of floors to the beveled panel to create surround those proportioned openings on the facade.
And will that have a kind of green tint, the spandrel glass?
It will have perhaps a slight greenish hue, but will be from the same manufacturer. So we're not adding any additional coatings to alter the coloring. So it'll be more warmer gray though in appearance with the spandrel coating behind.
And will any of these be operable? Because I'm looking at that
Yes.
kind of taller vertical piece and wondering if that's the operable window. Yes.
Yep, every bedroom will have an operable light. Yep, and that will be a darker frame. And then the patterns will kind of dance as they go up the building and across.
And every room will finally be air conditioned, which is not something I hope to pass on now from the war stories that I'm sure you've heard of the building.
So, if I can ask a couple questions. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate the conversation here on this strategy around the sort of core kind of building area. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the attitude towards, warming up the existing building, or sort of attitude in general about this existing building more holistically. And I'm just wondering to what extent are there other opportunities to, let's say, kind of push the building forward? And maybe to ask a little bit of a leading question, I mean, I'm wondering about attitude towards screening rooftop equipment, or attitude towards the canopy signage down below? Like to what extent are we, again, this is a very, I think, smart and successful insertion, and I'm just wondering, are there other spaces that have been considered to, again, bring a sort of more holistic strategy towards warming up the building or sort of accenting other areas of the building?
When it came to the roof screens, our approach was to try and conceal what we could in the way that we could, because of the structural limitations we have. I do have some images in the appendix that I could show a cross section, because we are limited by the height. This equipment to achieve the all electric energy efficiency goal for BU is tremendously large. It's generators, it's air to water heat pumps. We can't go higher than the equipment because it would interrupt airflow, and we can't. And once we get to a certain height, we have to introduce cross bracing. And because of the size of
Got
the
it.
equipment, there's nowhere for it to go. I could jump to that section if you want me to. Right here, you could see the size of the generator, the size of the DOAS unit. Our screens, the screens at least try and mitigate what you see of the roof. So our goal was to not draw attention to it if we can, and just sort of partially
Sure,
conceal it. So
sure.
we're thinking like neutral gray materials that would just sort of kind of make it more background visually.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. Was there any aspiration or thought about the again the canopies canopies at the retail signage areas? And forgive me if I don't know if this is a landmark building or if there are things there that can't be modified, but just I'm curious there. Just was that considered an opportunity to maybe update how the building meets the public realm with that signage area?
Yeah, I'll take that question, Jonathan. So that the current scope of the project is to remove the canopy, repair it, clean it up, and then install it as is.
As is.
But we do appreciate that, there might be some opportunities there to, enhance the public realm a little better by doing something different with that canopy. So what we propose to do is, continue that discussion,
Yeah.
down the road with the, BPDA, and possibly make improvements to that, as well as maybe for the storefront, moving, in the entrance to the building.
Got it.
We're trying really hard to, get this project moving forward.
Yeah.
But we also appreciate your concerns and comments. So we're happy to, take that further down the road in our design. It'd probably be one of the last things we would do anyway on the project, because we'd have to take it off just to facilitate the work anyway. So happy to have further discussions, as we move down the path with that.
Yeah, and certainly I'm sure you can appreciate we're trying to calibrate our comments to what is most critical path here, and kind of understanding that. I think there's a lot to like. I think I maybe just would agree with that approach. I do think that canopy is something that should be considered, but is maybe something that can be pushed off to be looked at holistically later.
That'd be
in my
great.
opinion. And yeah, I think the comments with regards to the mechanical screening, I certainly appreciate the complexity there and understood on your approach there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really like the approach, particularly that's being shown here.
Yeah.
I think the framing, the warmth around kind of the windows, I think even the graduating, kind of going from the 2 to the 3 to the 4 is really clever. And my thoughts are again to help us understand how this building will be experienced with more of that clear glass, because even the diagrams to the left suggest that the glass is quite gray in color and tint, versus clear, and then even understanding the spandrel, if it is green, helping us to understand what that really will look like. And then just another thing to think about, I think for the framing of the individual windows, there's kind of 4 parts to each, right? One that's operable. I would hope that framing also might be a warm tone. It was hard to tell whether it was kind of that brighter gray or white, or whether it also is a warm tone, but I'd encourage you to think about that also being warm, so that the composition of the building with the warm yellow brick and the kind of copper framing, and then even down to the framing of the individual glass, could read as a family.
So rather than like a dark, warm gray, something perhaps with a color to it. Yeah,
I think-
because go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think just thinking about this is what I'm looking at, right? This
Yes, that's the
it
optical.
almost looks like kind of a bright gray, and to me doesn't feel as compositional as the warmth that you're introducing in all of these other locations. And so, could be more of a family of color. Just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Might offer one. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne Marie.
I was just going to suggest too, just again, thinking about this development comprehensively, what is happening on the ground and the casings around the windows, and just, is this all kind of part of a whole as you introduce these changes? I think really appreciated Jonathan's comment or question about sort of what's the historic significance, so to speak, of the building. To what extent are you honoring kind of the original design versus being intentional about changing it? And I think that that's fine. I do think that's important to convey when you come back to BCDC. But also, one of my concerns is often what happens when people make changes to buildings over time. It's done sort of in bits and pieces, and that's often what contributes to a feeling of dissatisfaction with the design. So I think that's just really, I think what a number of us are saying in this conversation is, it's terrific you're making these improvements. There seems to be a strong rationale to what you're doing, but don't forget to think of this, while you're being very kind of focused in your interventions. In the midst of that, don't forget to think about this as at the building as a composition, both in and of itself, and as it relates to BU as a campus and the street of Commonwealth Avenue. It feels like just the nature of what we're seeing in your illustrations today, which I understand are presented to be very specific and focused, are appearing in isolation. So I'm just kind of curious, so how does this, what's the transition from the tower elements and the window changes you're making to the base and the retail base? How do they relate to each other? And then how do they relate to the paving material that's on the horizontal plane and the planters? It's just hard. And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the details of the space. So this is what's prompting my questions. So just something to keep in mind as you move forward.
Yeah, that was, I echo that completely. I think looking at these things holistically and understanding how they can all reinforce an overall point of view towards the existing building. I think the sort of discussion around the windows makes a ton of sense, but how do you, again, as you move this forward, kind of affirm that same strategy as you look at that kind of podium volume and any sort of interventions there? And I think one space I was going to point at as an opportunity also for further discussion eventually is the sort of parapet that I'm seeing there now at the top of the podium. Right now, it seems pretty clunky as just sort of like a band of that color. When I look at the existing street view, like it's got some lightness to it, some texture with the sort of reveal within it. Just thinking about, again, there was an attitude in terms of the folding of the metal to kind of create shadow lines on the window. I just want to again, as this goes forward, seeing that same intentionality brought to those levels, to that level as well at the podium level. But again, I think there's a lot to like, and it's easy to see how that strategy around the sort of base tower can be extended throughout the project. So,
Great.
Thank you.
I think this is an amazing building type and an amazing building. 1,800 students coming and going, a lot of them at peak hour. And I think that the kind of design principles are pretty sound, especially on the sidewalk, making sure that you're accommodating those bursts of students kind of coming and going, and making sure there's ample space on the sidewalk to accommodate that kind of traffic. And then also offering this much more interesting kind of experience of the building as you're coming up and down Commonwealth Avenue. And really that experience are the east-west faces, just like we're seeing here. You don't actually see the building head on as you're coming along Commonwealth Avenue. Those that are seeing the building head on are pedestrians. And so I think it allows you to have a much finer grained experience with the canopies, with the ground floor openings that we've been talking about that cater much more to pedestrians. And I think all of those things are what you're including in the project.
Commissioner Issa, I'm wondering if we could ask for public comment.
Great.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. I see Pam Beal, you have your hand raised.
Yes, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Pam Beal, and I'm the chair of the Boston University Community Task Force, and I really appreciate the discussion this evening. And my hope is that there is a way for you to allow this building and all of the significant interior work to move forward so that the university can stay within the schedule and move the students back into Warren Towers on the timeline and in the phases discussed with the community. We think this is all important work. We just want to make sure that the timeline is met, the students get to move into this building, and all of the fun elements get to be done, but on a sort of parallel track with getting the interior completed and the building open and occupied. So thank you, and anything you can do to help make that happen is greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Pam. Commissioners, I am not seeing any additional raised hands at this time. We don't need to make a vote, but we do need to have some kind of consensus about next steps for the project.
So I'll just summarize what I understand, and I think Pam did a good job of that. So when we first reviewed this project on March 5th, the idea was to take the Warren Towers piece first because we wanted to make sure that the university had time to kind of move that section of the project forward more quickly. So Christina, since Warren Towers is part and parcel of the full review, how should we think about kind of just maybe accelerating that portion, or having that discussion, or having it with the larger commission? This is kind of an unusual sectioning off of the project. Not that we don't usually do it, but then we bring it back for a vote in its entirety.
Right. Because they are seeking Article 80B and Article 80, I guess it's D, Ken, for the IMP extension. You're correct that they require the extension of the IMP simultaneous to the project, which we are not granting at this time, right? We have not yet talked about the Pardee School or other aspects of the IMP extension. So it would be my recommendation that we kind of consider the matter of Warren Towers as from the perspective of design subcommittee, that we feel comfortable targeting future agenda items and subcommittee to other aspects of the IMP extension, and that we would make a formal vote on Warren Towers, with the full commission as we do the IMP in the future. So I realize that that's a little bit messy, but then, it would leave space for the future design subcommittee meetings to, adequately address other aspects of the IMP. Does that make sense?
Right, so that we're generally following the same pattern where we have the subcommittee meetings topically, with today being Warren Towers. Okay.
Yes. Ken, is that also sort of?
Yeah, I think our intention here was, per you chair, the flat full committee meeting was, right, take it project by project. So if we're leaving this in a comfortable position where, you know, the commission is satisfied, or, you know, with some provisos later on to continue to look at this, great. But from here, you know, we feel it would be, you know, put this project aside now. We look forward to coming back to the commission to talk about Article 80D as in dog, related to the zoning of the Party School of Global Studies. Again, a project that we're just seeking the zoning considerations for, that will, excuse me, have its own subsequent Article 80B filing when that project is formally filed. And then at the conclusion of that, you know, be able to seek approval.
Do commissioners feel comfortable with the advice and recommendations we've made today to move on to the other elements of this proponent project?
I do, actually.
Yeah, I think it's been a good conversation, and I think we're in a good spot.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think you've had some good comments today. Great.
So I guess just for clarification, it would be essentially that this more or less can be moved from subcommittee at the appropriate time back to the full commission. We will continue the subcommittee conversation as it relates to, again, our new project, the Party School of Global Studies, at a future subcommittee date.
Yes, that's typically what we do. So with larger projects, sometimes we'll look at, you know, open space concerns at a subcommittee, and then we might look at building massing at another one. And so we'll follow that pattern, peeling off the Warren Towers today.
Actually, Linda, if I could just add one caveat to that we do not have a landscape architect as part of this discussion. So is this a case maybe where BPDA staff could just bring into a conversation in order to keep this project moving? Just make sure we have some input from one of our landscape architect colleagues on the public realm improvements.
Yeah, I think that we can make open space, you know, a feature of the next subcommittee.
I see. Okay, got it. Thank you.
And I think, you know, even if we consider the discussion of Warren Towers kind of to some degree resolved for the moment, you know, until we get to a full commission vote, I don't think that precludes us from revisiting any questions that were asked today at a future subcommittee meeting. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Commissioners.
So just going to give Lizzie a couple moments to promote relevant folks for the next presentation. We'll be hearing from the proponent team for 500 Huntington Avenue and Mission Hill. This will be the second presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee. And of the commissioners assigned to this session, Commissioner Solano was present at the most recent BCDC design subcommittee in June 2023, and I will be messaging her right now to have her return for this presentation. So just give me one quick moment before you guys jump into it. Apologies, I think we're just going to wait. If we don't mind, just giving Commissioner Solano just 2 quick minutes to rejoin. Lizzie, any sign yet of Commissioner Solano?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Commissioner Easley, would you prefer to wait for her to arrive, or should we begin the presentation?
I think we can start since she was at the most recent one. Some of the early slides may be review for her anyway.
Okay, great.
Chris, you should be elevated. There's two Chris daughters in this, both have the co-host abilities.
That could be me. I'm Peter Schubert, partner at INEAD, and I got a email from Chris that was the way I could get in. I'm actually out of the country, so that's the way I got into this particular meeting. So there's two Chris's. Otherwise, I'd have to drop out if that's something that they can't accommodate.
That's no problem. I think we received a message from Chris Stoddard, other Chris Stoddard, that they're not able to unmute their audio and camera. But it appears that they have co-host abilities, so I'm not sure what exactly is contributing to that at this moment. Chris, it might be valuable for you to exit and rejoin.
I'll be sharing the presentation today, Ethan Shaw, INEAD Architects, if that is what you're asking.
Ethan, this is Peter. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
What I'll do is just mute everything, and then why don't you do the presentation, and I'll just pipe in at the summary or at the video.
Okay.
Great. You guys can begin when you're ready, and we'll keep an eye out for Commissioner Solano.
Great. So this is Don Johnson. I apologize. My camera is on, but it's not working, and I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that, but the show must go on. So this is the 500 Huntington Avenue project, which is, I represent the Huntington Development Group, and this is the project that is being developed at the Sweeney Field site at Wentworth Institute of Technology. Although this is on Wentworth's property, it is developed through a ground lease by Huntington Development Group, which is a joint venture between Waldwin Development, the Owens Companies, and Fallon Company, which are all local Boston-based companies. It is a 640,000 square foot life science building in 2 buildings with underground parking and first floor retail active space. It's approximately a 3-acre site, and over an acre of the site will be available and publicly accessible. The last time that we were at BCDC subcommittee was back in November of 2023, and members of INEAD and Lemon Brook will be presenting today. Ethan, you can go ahead, go to the next slide.
Done. So a few items that we received at the last subcommittee meeting to further study were the alignment of the passageway between the 2 buildings and how it interacts with the greater context, its connection to Northeastern, how pedestrians move through the site. Another was the retail identity and pedestrian engagement, how the building touches the ground, a cohesive experience that engages all pedestrian activity around the site, whether it's retail in Huntington or on Ruggles Street. And the last is a additional tree buffer at the large public space at the intersection of Ruggles and Huntington to further separate pedestrian activity from the roadways. So we're going to start out with the alignment of the passageway between the buildings and how a pedestrian might experience the transition of spaces moving from Ruggles Street through Northeastern, the portal, through the 500 Huntington site, and then further connecting to the Museum of Fine Arts, the Fenway, and the access to Wentworth. So given the constraints of the connection on Ruggles for the extended tree alley, connection to Wentworth and a more formal access, we've opted to look at landscape strategies to further elevate the pedestrian experience and kind of frame smaller moments as you move through, which I'll pass off to Christian to talk more about now.
All right, thanks, Ethan. Okay, maybe the next slide is actually the best one because that actually has some of the comments there, right? Okay, we did a number of studies and we sort of boiled it down to these 3 here, or 2 following the one on the left, the existing one. And, you know, I don't think either end of the passageway, you know, addressed the plaza or Parker Street all that well. There wasn't a whole lot of experiences along the passageway. So we started to open it up and see if we could have a better relation to Northeastern in the view corridor through landscape. And so the first one says, well, maybe the passageway isn't symmetrical with landscape and that it's asymmetrical and we open up a corridor next to the west building. And we start to add moments on Parker Street where you start to get advantage of some of the sun pockets there. It's good people viewing on Parker Street, an intermediate area for the secondary entries to the lobby. And then up at the plaza, there's a place to engage more with what's going on in the plaza and so forth. And that seemed to, pull people through, but maybe not as well as it could. So moving on to the final, the preferred scheme, I think it has all those intermediate moments for people to experience, but thinking that, maybe, going down the center of the passageway, landscape on both sides and how it interacts with the lobbyway helps push people to the northeastern portal. Next. And then, so these are quick kind of, massing studies here. So this starts to get you a sense of how you would move through that space. Again, you start to see the nodes start to engage Parker Street a little more. There's always been some comments on, what's going on along Parker Street. So I think this opening really helps. And you start to see the scale, the landscape, and the spaces break up as you go to the plaza.
I'm going to share some walkthroughs with you so you can see how that experience is in 3 dimensions. If you give me one moment. You guys can see that. So this is walking across Huntington Avenue, kind of meander through the gates of the railway, have to make a turn to get out to the public plaza, opportunities for public art, the large 2-story storefronts with 24-hour lighting at the lobbies, landscape on each side. And then we have these landscape elements that kind of point you to move your eye towards this portal, the northeastern dorms, where you cross the street. As you move through the portal, you kind of bear left, heading through northeastern towards Ruggles Station. Now this would be heading in the opposite direction of the same path. So we're starting at northeastern campus, walking towards the portal at a bit of an angle. You approach there, right? It's the first sign of the 500 Huntington development. Across the street, you can see that opportunity for a lively passage. The landscape framing both sides, creating different picturesque moments, places of respite, landscape opportunity, 24-hour lit lobbies, very transparent glass. And as you continue to move through towards the Museum Way, you have to bear right again to cross tracks, go around and get over to Museum Way. You can either bear right to the Museum of Fine Arts or keep going on towards the Fenway. Next topic that we were asked to take a deeper look into was the retail experience and the pedestrian engagement at the storefronts as the building hits the ground. Looking for a very transparent opportunity. This would be the Ruggles at the intersection of the Wentworth axis. So you're looking east right now. So the transparent storefronts, integrated louvering for flexibility, a hammered metal warmer soffit with integrated lighting. There's also integrated lighting in the landscape with different seating opportunities, whether at the cafe or just general pedestrian. And in the background, you can see the lobbies, the 2 entries coordinated with each other towards the office entry for the towers. This is the same view, but stepping back a little bit on Ruggles, so you can see how that experience we were just looking at overlays with new pedestrian improvements. The Ruggles LA moving up Ruggles, the new cycling path moving up as well. So there's a lot of layering of pedestrian and cyclist activities. And towards the left, you can see the larger public space, an open lawn framed by more trees. And then back in the left is the Museum of Fine Arts.
Just a heads up to the front team, you have a 2-minute warning.
Great, thank you. This is the Huntington retail opportunity. So this is right across the street from the Museum of Fine Arts. It's a similar approach, so it's a consistent look across the entire project, same signage strategy, louvering strategy, same kind of warm metal hammered soffit with integrated lighting. And there's a step back in the building to allow for covered outdoor seating, more landscape opportunity. Question?
Yep. Okay. So topic 3, adding extra, another layer of trees along Huntington to create some separation. So you can see where we were on the left, on the right. Pink dots are the added trees. So we've taken planting a new alley of trees that's off center from the existing street trees that will remain on Huntington there. You've sort of mimicked that on the other side. And part of the, I think the topic is, are there edges to occupy and so forth? So by simply grading this lawn, we've about 2.5–2%. We've allowed for a bunch of seating edges, and so you can occupy all these different sides of it. So whether you like sun or shade. So if we go to the next slide. So you start to see how this sets up. You see the Ruggles alley, the bike, and the walkway there. So now in Huntington, we have a similar amount of separation from that busy street with more planting. Next slide. This is if you're walking along the pedestrian street connecting Wentworth into the project. So you can imagine folks walking back and forth. Now there's a place to peel off on these edges and have different kinds of seating, to be studied further. Seating steps, tables and chairs and so forth. And then finally, slide, you start to see really these, 3–4 sides of how to engage the open space in a variety of ways and different pieces all along those edges. The far right there, you start to see we always had an implication of a stage, so you have about a 3-foot difference. You can imagine activities going on in the plaza facing out to this new public space here. That's it.
And thank you. I'd like to invite the commissioners into discussion.
Ethan, are you running the slideshow?
Yep.
Can you put a site plan up for us?
That work?
That's great. Other commissioners might want some other slides, but I can share a few comments. I wasn't at the last subcommittee, so Laura, I'm sure we'll have some good insight there about progress. I just wanted to make this comment. I think this is a really creative solution to a complex site. You have this site, which is really trying to kind of solve 2 grids coming together, one from Northeastern and one from Wentworth, and making sense of how pedestrians come from both of those 2 kind of entities and make their way over to Huntington Avenue and then back. And I think the way that you've looked at really making these 2 primary paths through the site makes a lot of sense to me. And I also like the fact that the way that you move through the site isn't purely orthogonal, but that there are some kind of moments of inflection as you're moving through that bring different views. And I think that'll make the experience a lot more rich and interesting. One comment that I had is actually coming off of the Parker Street slice. I wonder if we can go to, we can either zoom in on the site plan or go to some views, essentially with my back toward Northeastern. And that one is fine too, if you want to go back one. So one of the thoughts that I had, and it became more apparent to me through the in the fly through, which that was really helpful. Thank you for bringing it. Was in this section here. And my comment is that in all of these other kind of, lawn panel areas, we have this kind of smoothing of the edges here and here, here and here. But when we're coming across Parker Street here, it felt very much like this one didn't have that smoothing, and it kind of felt like it was a pinch point right in here. And so I'm curious about other things you might have looked at, because I think that there is something really elegant about the way that you have addressed some of these other open spaces where you essentially have a larger kind of paved space here, and then this larger paved space here, but then this pinch point occurs here. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. Let's see here. I don't know if we meant it to be a pinch point. I know through some of our discussions with BPDA that there was a talk that there wasn't an evenness that you move through the space, and that when you come out of the portal, sort of it's closed and then it's open into Parker Street and you see the new project, and then that there might be a bit of a threshold at the beginning as you move north through landscape. And as you get to that middle piece there that you had marked up, then it then opens up again with, a better view to the plaza, so that it's not one straight shot, that there's a slower pace to moving through and the scale and so forth. Whether we have the right dimension, right where you mentioned the pinch point, that, certainly could be studied more. I think when you're coming the other way from the north-south, this was a little bit of a way to break up, it opens up in that center area, but I think there's still a clear path to the portal. So I don't know if that necessarily addresses your question, but that was some of the thinking there.
Yeah, and I'll let
add that it also creates kind of like two different spaces, as you pointed out and you drew. So as you're walking along Parker, if you're not necessarily going into the 500 Huntington site, there is this moment of open space that you can occupy, and then that threshold that Christian was mentioning is where the office lobby begins. So the creation of those two spaces might create new opportunity for different occupants of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Laura and Anne Marie, you're so great at raising your hand, but you don't have to at subcommittee.
Oh,
You can just jump in.
we're so well trained.
I know.
Thank you for the presentation, and the videos were terrific. They really helped. Although I don't think I can walk that fast, but I appreciate those. They're a lot of work. My comments. First of all, I think that you've landed on the right scheme here, and I also think you've done a great job of really bringing that together without it feeling too insistent in either direction. My comments about this are simple. One is looking at how the edges work here, which I think is somewhat what Linda was getting to. But for me, this feels like either it's too short or too long. I'm not sure which, but it doesn't quite, let me erase myself. It doesn't quite work for me. And I don't know, it's really hard to tell at these scales, like the white boxes that are in those spaces, what are those?
So that's seating. So different
Seating?
idea of the configuration of seating.
Like benches,
Yeah.
tables?
So Ethan, do you want to go to the bird's eye? So again, these are study models, so they're not in any, great detail, but yeah. So I mean, these nodes are a place of rest, that is places to sit, ideally taking advantage of the most sun that we'll get in the passageway and angled in a way to look out on Parker Street and so forth. So, with more study, but places to be.
And those are permanent benches, is that right?
That's the idea.
It's not
that
furniture.
No, there would be permanent pieces that could be augmented, potentially with movable pieces, especially on the area that faces the plaza.
Yeah. And something that you might consider adding is, and not to every edge and not overly so, but you might think about adding benches that maybe in plan could be cut into the bed so that they're not taking up this kind of really nice wide path that goes down here. And I know that the dark walls are just really placeholders right now. Although maybe you're thinking they're Corten or something like that
Well, I don't know if they're Corten, but they're probably a metal planter. I mean, so we have to be reminded that we're on top of structure here. So anytime we, as you know, right, when we have, taller plant material, we're going to need soil depth. So I think the planter heights will vary depending on, how the planting scheme works out. And so we're gonna come up to some degree to accommodate that. And there's probably a metal material that is working with some of, the metal on the building, at the ground floor.
Yep. Yep. Well, you might think in these, awful long beds about putting in some benches. It's always kind of a nice, and if they're notched in, it'll be nice for kind of people watching. And
yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, I mean, there's that next level of scale, kind of breaking it down. There was the original scheme, the one shot. We broke it down to the next scale, and now you're, I think it's the next step. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think it would just behoove you, now that you actually have all the tools like the video and these perspectives, to look at how those edges kind of, the walk through this is really nice. Just, is the entry as nice as once you get in the slot? So that was one thing. And then if we could go to the plan that shows the lawn. There you go. I think the double and sometimes triple row is really nice. And I think that shows up in the perspectives that you did. I think you have an aerial. So if we could go to that. It's just, there's something about landscape and urban conditions when you have really high buildings and wide roads that they need to have an oomph to them, a technical term. In order to kind of push back against all of that, so that when you cross the threshold into the landscape, you really feel like you've been embedded, you're in a different place. And so I think that's successful. Again, I think looking at how these ends kind of meet the entries in should be something that you'll study. And on this side as well, less so on this, because you're really kind of using the whole thing to make a space, which is pretty nice. But I wonder if, you might inflect this a little bit more, which might be nice, because suddenly you've got benches that are kind of turning in to the space, more than just tracing the edge of them. And I also think you could easily add a little bit of swell to that lawn. And again, you're right, it's the next detail, the level of detail. But
when you say swell, do you mean,
like making this the high point? It's almost reversing the contours that you have in there. So that there's just a little bit higher in the,
right.
center.
It's higher in the middle. Right. I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I know those look like hoops. But yeah, so that there's just this kind of like little swell.
Yeah,
so that
a little bit of a pillow.
Yeah. So when you're standing on this side, you're actually kind of hiding the path that's on this side. It's that old Olmsted trick where you would kind of pillow the topography so that you couldn't see the other path. It's very tricky that way. So this feels pretty solid to me. The areas that I'm less certain about it, and I think it's just my own reading of it, is the perspectives that you showed of the corners of the retail spaces. I got a little disoriented in there. Yeah, that one, and then the one before in particular. Yeah, where am I? I see this plan,
Yeah, so this is the pedestrian street. So if you were coming from Wentworth across Ruggles, you would be coming down here into the center of the project. So in the far background there is the entry to the east
Can you
building.
draw on the plan?
Ethan.
I think the big green
This is
space is to the
Wentworth
left,
access.
Laura, if that makes sense. The big green space is to the
Got
left.
it.
You can see the red
Got it.
sculpture that signifies
Oh,
the
I see it.
that-
I
that's-
see it.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was in the
Yeah.
absolute wrong place. Thank you. Okay.
So our pillow lawn is to the left here.
Yes, exactly. Right. Now I see it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other one, if you could take me to that and orient me, is that just looking the opposite way?
This
Not
is
that
just pulled
one.
back, maybe. Oh,
No, the pullback I get. That one. So we're
this
just
one,
looking the opposite way towards that. Right.
You're actually on
Yeah,
Huntington here.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
this would be like standing right across the street from the MFA.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right, thank you. I'm oriented now. And so do you have any thoughts about, I mean, you have a pretty generous plant bed there, relatively speaking. Have you thought about what you're going to do in those strips? Is this showing pavement that's going through? Is that what that is? Or
I think, yeah, so we've got some different, different versions of renderings here. So looking at the Avenue Arts guidelines of keeping, the planter strip there and a 10-foot sidewalk. The trees along here, platanus trees there that we plan to keep as much as possible through the construction there. So I think we'd like to, they're existing trees, how far the trees, how much we can plant potentially around and soften that edge to a degree. And then I don't think we want to plant the whole strip. There isn't parallel parking stuff. It's a pretty busy road, but we still see an opportunity in that frontage there for either some, bike parking or things like that. So where there isn't planted, I think we would have, pavers of some sort, whether they're we've talked with our team, whether there's some green infrastructure that can happen in there or not. So it's a little bit, need to be studied there more.
yeah. And so those are existing trees?
Yeah. Yes, they
Wow.
are.
And are they really as close as you're showing to the edge where the pavement is?
Nah, probably not. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, boy. You got to sink some money in those to really get them to survive,
Yeah,
I mean,
especially next to the
worth it.
building. When we get over to the open space, there's, hopefully a little more opportunity.
Yeah.
I guess there's the thing that, if only a few survive and, then is it really worth, then, do you replant the streets so that you have an evenness to when this project comes on board? So.
Yeah. But you might have to like air spade and really baby them. And you're right, probably not plant below them too much because it'll disturb the roots too much. I think sort of a bearish ground is better than losing the tree. It's a trade-off when you get into these situations, but I get it. And nice work overall. You've really, I think, kind of moved the design along, and you've got a good basis to go forward to do all the fun detailing and further development. So I appreciate that.
Great. Well, thanks for your help. You helped push it along.
I have a comment about the architecture. So I don't want to take us, I don't want to move us on to another subject. If my colleagues have additional comments about the public realm. I guess I'll go ahead. So this is a case of another project where I don't recall having seen it much. If at all, I think the public realm, the way you're addressing the public realm is very clear. This is an area where I've spent a lot of time walking between Ruggles, through Northeastern's campus to meetings and then on to the MFA. So I really appreciate your efforts to think about how that pathway is clear. If you could bring up either that very last slide or an image that shows you had like sort of the development, the bird's eye image that shows not this one, but maybe one of, I think it was your last slide. So one of the things I was thinking about, and this is a broader question that's not only directed to your project, but just something I think about quite a bit in respect to the projects that we review at BCDC, is that one of the things that, you know, I think among the many things that distinguish this district, Mission Hill and Avenue of the Arts, is this collection of educational institutions, arts organizations, the idea that that Huntington Avenue is considered the Avenue of the Arts. And I think this image and the one that is on the BPDA website for this project really illustrate the colors and textures and the richness of this place. It really is something that I think brings together in many ways some of the most fascinating characteristics of Boston. You know, as one of my colleagues refers to Boston as being a brick city or a red city, this is a place where we have the textures of brick and stone. And I think Northeastern's campus has its own identity in many ways. And there seems to be a design aesthetic of a certain building type that often, like this one, is you know, a life science building where there's the footprint is the same and the architecture of the building is the same. And I understand that this is you know, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the design vision and programs on behalf of your client. I guess my question is, what makes this building of its place and not of Kendall Square or the Seaport or Dorchester Bay? You know, what really anchors this building as a place that's along Avenue of the Arts, that's a part of this, that's a part of Wentworth, that's a part of Mission Hill? And I realize that's a much bigger question, and I apologize if I'm taking our discussion off track, but it's just something that I just would like our BCDC to think of, and also for a project. You know, this is a project of significant scale and scope. We're reviewing it for this reason, but really what makes this, you know, what is it about this building that's responding to its context above and beyond the details of the public realm on the ground plane?
You know, I can take that one, Ethan. Peter Schubert here. As I said, I'm over in Shenzhen, so I'll try to call it in.
Thanks for joining us from a.
You know, I think, you know, you hit it on. You know, that this particular area of Boston, particularly around the MFA, really relies on the landscape. I mean, the Fenway and the way it comes in there, the way the Avenue of the Arts has kind of an urban quality to it, but it also has a lot of courtyards off of it, up and down the Avenue of the Arts. So it's really one of the rare areas really of Boston, you know, in urbanism in general, where landscape and buildings really coalesce together. And they cohabitate, you know, along the various streets, forming parks and street wall conditions and retail. So it's kind of a garden community. And I think that this particular area of Boston is really great for that. Plus the campus designs, and in a sense that, you know, the edge conditions are blurred around the campus now. It's really engaging the campus with some of the retail spaces around the park. A lot of retail, very needed retail, in my opinion, in this area of Boston, because there aren't a lot of cafes and places to sort of just simply hang out, both, you know, as a student and maybe hopefully it'll participate with some of the museum goers. So, you know, I think that engagement between landscape and building, which and particularly structured landscape, and the other thing is really the colors. This particular area, as you said, has the sort of the stone of the MFA. It's got some red bricks farther to the west. So we looked at it, and we don't have the slide today that showed all the rich sort of textures in the neighborhood, but it had a kind of brick green stone thing going on, which was actually a little less consistent than other areas of like Beacon Hill or something like that, where it's all red brick. So, you know, I think the playing to the color of the terracotta, playing to the color of the beautiful copper buildings, including the Gardner, all of that kind of coloration. And then Elizabeth was quite strong about the ceilings of the plazas being really a fifth elevation. Sorry, to the plaza. So we included that in that sort of hammered metal as kind of a soffit to the whole public space that goes inside out.
Thank you. I think it really, you know, I keep coming back to these skyline images and look at it and just again think about what are these buildings contributing to the skyline. But I appreciate your efforts to address the context and the public realm.
I just want to chime in that I appreciate Commissioner Lubenow putting that forth, because that was one of my initial questions. Was this is a very engaging corner, if you will, and given the amount of foot traffic, car traffic, public transportation in this area, it does stand out uniquely on its own, as opposed to being complementary to the skyline, which is a concern for me. Let alone I think about the 4 seasons that this building is going to go through and what that means for public around on the ground floor. So for me, I'm just co-signing on Commissioner Lubenow because it generally does concern me about this being the Avenue of the Arts and how in which this design can play to that and enhance what that means for the public as a whole. I'm just not sure if you all are there yet, in my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner Morris. I think actually your comment, as I look at the image that's on the screen now, again, what communicates I think the basic moves are you know, very appropriate in terms of how we, you know, the proportion of spaces and thinking about things. But again, what when I look at this image, it could be an image of a corporate, and granted, this is, you know, given the purpose, you know, it could be a corporate campus. Again, what makes this place, you know, what distinguishes, I guess, this development, as I said earlier, from other developments of comparable size and architecture? You know, what makes this, you know, how does it, to use Commissioner Morris's words, you know, what is it contributing to the public realm of the Avenue of the Arts? I would just encourage you to think about that as you know, this is a significant investment in the public realm of our city, and how, you know, how does it, what are its contributions as you develop the design, and how can you, you know, what makes this place unique that further enhances some of the steps you've already taken, and as you described, in thinking about the palette of other buildings, other developments in the area that you drew upon. You know, how can you continue to take that approach even further as you move forward?
Has that been discussed at the at the other meetings that you've had with the city? Just curious, because Anne-Marie, I think you bring up just a really basic point that I'm wondering about what comments have been made before this.
So this is Elizabeth Stiefel. I'm the staff reviewer for this project, and I'm also really appreciating Commissioner Lubenow's comments. I think the largest part of our discussion has been focused on the public realm, where it was and how it was working. It's actually changed a great deal from when the project came in, and also looking at the relationship to Ruggles and the space between the buildings. But I think there's always been a certain level of concern about the introduction of a sort of foreign building type in this area and how to bridge that. And I think we just haven't gotten there yet. So I really appreciate that you're bringing it up now.
I love this conversation too. And I wasn't at the last subcommittee. Lara, I think you might be our only representative from the last subcommittee. But I would really love to dive deeper into the building form itself. And we often in these larger projects will take a meeting that talks about maybe more of the urban design and landscape moves, and then talk about the building form. And my understanding is that we haven't had that more in-depth conversation. And Elizabeth, correct me if that's a wrong assumption, but it would be great to have, my suggestion is to have the next subcommittee focus more on the building form, the context of that building form, and for the proponent to take us through the evolution of that form so that we can understand it a little better, and maybe even taking us through the evolution of that form. Oh yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing some of these up. And I saw the original presentation when you presented back to back with Wentworth, which was actually really, really helpful. But I think it would be helpful to also dive into this in subcommittee when we have a little bit more time to do that. So that's one suggestion I'll just put on the table.
I second that.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would agree with that. I think that's warrants its own discussion. I don't know if there's enough space for that here. I think the public realm overall, I think public realm connectivity comments or landscape comments make a lot of sense, but I do think some of the massing materiality contextual questions around the architecture warrant a more robust space.
Would it be helpful just to review quickly the massing discussion from the last BCDC subcommittee? The slides on that.
Yeah, and
no, we can.
Yeah. Sorry,
I'm sorry.
No, I think
one more.
It's a good discussion. You know. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed
would
to.
Would it make sense to have that conversation? Would it make sense to have that conversation when we review the building? I love the idea of a focused conversation about the building and the architecture, and I think that might be a great place to, have that conversation.
I agree. I know we have one more project to review this evening, and we haven't had a chance to ask for public comments on more of the public realm conversations. So I guess I would suggest to the other commissioners that we might have our next subcommittee focused on materiality and form. And I think there have been some great comments here about the urban design public realm.
And to the extent there were conversations around form and materiality in previous subcommittee meetings that had conclusions that are worth discussing and building off of, would love to just have that be at the forefront of the presentation, or we can talk with BCDC staff on getting that to us ahead of time to review. I know it can be frustrating to have musical chairs of commissioners in and out, but I think, and can certainly want to build off of conclusions that others have sort of received, but I do think it does warrant its own separate conversation, as Linda said.
Yeah, appreciate that. I'd also include there was a pavilion on the site, and obviously scale is an issue. These buildings are very much really what we would call lab buildings, and lab buildings have a real modularity to them and a real consistency and the flexibility, and the buildings reflect that. Any facade moves would be necessarily imposed on the building for scale reasons only. Really, it doesn't, right at that point, they wouldn't be reflecting any of the interior sort of programmatic issues. But I think probably the thing that was missed in this particular group of commissioners is a lot of work that's been done on the plaza. There was a pavilion in the plaza, which was obviously removed for a number of good reasons and by the past commissioners. So we should probably get you to where we are today, because it is, I think, a building that in the aerial, you can see that there are a number of buildings of this scale in the area, and there's also a number of buildings that are much smaller. And I think that that's where the some of the discussions were in the beginning that we should work you through.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That would be really helpful. Christina, does that work from your side to have our next subcommittee review the materiality and form?
Absolutely. But as you noted previously, we're not quite done yet. I do need to ask for public comment.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I was going to say, if you agree with that.
Okay, sorry.
I see that Allison has her hand up and there may be other public comments as well.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. We will start with Allison Poltinas. Allison, are you able to unmute yourself? Or do you need us to request you to unmute? I believe you've been promoted to co-host. Allison, unfortunately, we are not able to hear you right now. We will send you a request to unmute. I think we had this issue previously, actually, with you specifically. So I really hope to get this resolved. We might move on to Eric Woods and come back to you, Allison.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I am Eric Woods. I am with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And I just wanted to make a quick comment around this project and its effect on us. Specifically, there are 2 areas which we are tracking very, very closely. One is what the shadowing will do to our facade and front and experience. Also the lay lighting. Some of the galleries on the 2nd floor do have skylights that provide lay lights, and that shadowing will affect the experience in the building, or require us to use actually more artificial lighting, which will have an impact on us, especially as we think about Birdo. The second issue is the building itself and the objects contained within. A project of this scale will have a consistent set of vibrations, and those vibrations will affect the objects, some of which are quite old, as you can understand, and quite fragile, as well as the facade itself, especially on that southwest corner of the building where we have experienced some issues with water retention, and any vibrations will only serve to exacerbate those issues going forward. So I just wanted to highlight those two issues we're tracking with regards to this project.
Christina, can I ask a follow-up question to Mr. Woods?
This is a discussion. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be such a tight moderator.
Mr. Woods, thank you for your comments. For the vibrations, are you specifically referring to the construction or actually the mechanical vibrations expected?
What the mechanical vibrations, you mean once the project is online?
Yes, I guess I'm asking if you could distinguish between, are you talking about during construction or after construction?
I think after construction is a concern, but it is secondary to the vibrations during construction, as those will be the most impactful.
Thank you.
Right. I think once the building's up and running, vibrations will be, they will be a concern, but there is some thought in the museum space about how you can mitigate even the vibrations of footfalls, even themselves do have an impact on sort of some of the older objects, but the construction is the main concern.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Just to reiterate that we definitely are also similarly tracking those items and have been tracking those items, and have been in conversations with his staff. And as we get to construction planning, construction documents, we'll be working with them about mitigation to address all of their vibration concerns.
Regarding the comments about the light and the shade or shadow on the MFA,
Sure.
Surely there have been sunshade studies. And what's been the impact of that? I mean, what kind of analysis, I guess, has been done?
Yeah. So the Avenue of the Arts has very clear guidelines about 2 hours of shade and shadow on the opposite side of Huntington Avenue during certain months of the year. I'm not sure off the top of my head what those are. And our shade and shadow studies show that we are definitely within that for most of those times, and that we're doing our best for the other times and going a little bit outside of that 2-hour window. The main area of concern, I think, is the entrance court and the appeal to the Great Spirit statue. And I think that we've been continuing to address that and shaping the building, lowering the towers in response to that to minimize that as much as possible and really do the best that we can to minimize the impact on that courtyard space. For the lay lights, we did an analysis, and the building does cast shadow on the lay lights for the new conservation space, but those lay lights actually face north, so because they get indirect light anyway, and the galleries themselves, most of them do prefer to have indirect light as opposed to direct light. And there are shadows from other buildings that actually impact that more than the new shadows of this project. But we'd be happy to sit down. We'll sit down again with the MFA and their staff to review all of that once again.
Christina, it looks like Allison has put her comment into the chat.
Yes, I'm just going to read it into the record here. And I'm sorry, Allison, that we are still experiencing technical difficulties as we have previously with your testimony. But Allison says, I have concerns about the new crosswalk at Parker and the relationship to the garage driveways. Also the multi-route bus stop on Ruggles and how that is integrated with the landscape. So I hesitate to make summarizing comments here other than I think, as was discussed before we entered into the public testimony phase, that we had, sort of already decided on revisiting review of this project at a future design subcommittee session. Commissioner Lubinow, is your hand raised from previously or?
Well, yes, I just wanted to, just in connection with our next review where we will focus on the building, I realized I appreciate Mr. Woods, your comments of highlighting the impact on the MFA. I was also struck when the proponent brought up a slide that showed the building in relationship to the MFA. I think, to be quite honest, I was sort of focused on the conversation about the connections, that just understanding the massing in respect to the museum is a concern of mine. So I just want to be sure, we just encourage that when the proponent comes back for the next meeting, that we have that context, that we have the context of the discussion that occurred at the full commission meeting and the concerns that were raised. We have illustrations that help us understand the context and the impact, as well as your, how from a design standpoint, how your design approach to the project and the choices you made. Because I'm sure you've given this a lot of thought. I know there's a lot to balance from a design perspective. So I think just the more information and we can, the more information we can have to understand what we're seeing, the more effective we could be in helping to advance the project.
So I think, Christina, we would like to see this project again to focus on materiality and form, and to Anne Marie's comments, the form even as it impacts context at our future subcommittee.
Roger that. All right. For the next project, I think we're just going to give Lizzie a couple seconds here to promote folks. We'll be seeing 475 through 511 Dorchester Avenue, also referred to as Core on the Dot, Phase 1B. This will actually be the 6th presentation of the proposed project to the Commission. Commissioners Eastley, Evans, Morris, and Solano were present at the most recent BCDC Design Subcommittee and referred the project for additional review. These commissioners should be prepared to deliver remarks at the start of deliberation. With that, I turn it over to the proponent team.
Evening, everyone. Mark Rosenshine with Trademark, joined by Lewis Kraft, BK Boley at Stantec, and Rob Adams at Halverson. Just to recap on where we were, and then I'll let the architects do the talking. If you remember, Phase 1B involves 3 commercial buildings, 505 Dorchester Avenue, 75 Ellery, 65 Ellery, and 2 open spaces. 2 commissions ago, we looked at open spaces and 505. Last subcommittee, we looked at 65 and 75. And at the end of that, what we said is, let us bring this all back to you, show it to you cohesively with all of the comments addressed in one package before it goes back to full commission. So that's what we hope to do tonight. There's a lot to show you, and we're going to try and document how we responded to all those comments. But that's really the goal, is we're going to try and put it all back together so you can see comprehensively how these 3 buildings and 2 open spaces work together. And I will turn it over to the architects and they can go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. It's BK Boley, Stantec Architecture, and Rob Adams is joining me from Halverson, as well as Lewis Kraft. I will try to go to full screen. Tell me if it works. Not yet. Can everybody see the screen? Yep. So we have a relatively quick agenda. We have the 3 buildings that we're discussing here, 505 on Dorchester Avenue, 65 and 75, as well as the open space in between. In terms of what we've heard and the things that we've been working on, we'll start in the upper left and then go clockwise. So for open space, we're talking about trying to have a more enhanced East Park presence on Dot Avenue, work on the character and transition of the terraces along Dot Avenue that we spent a lot of time with you on the last time. Look at the East Lawn grading adjustments to create a more inviting experience off of Dot Avenue, and then study the West Lawn berm form to also make sure that it's more inviting. In addition to that, we've been working on the crosswalk that cuts from the East Park to the West Park, and Rob will talk about that in a minute. On 505, we were asked to look at simplifying and strengthening the major architectural moves. Look at the column relationship on the podium of the Dorchester Avenue side of the building, where we had a kind of offset between the bays above, the columns below, the retail language. And then look at, again, that improved connection between the raised terrace and the sidewalk. So Rob and I will both be discussing that. And then visually connect the ground floor uses along the park. For 65 Ellery Street, which was the conceptual ship, we were asked to kind of strengthen the prow of the ship facing the park. In fact, most of it was covered by trees, I think, in the last few renderings. So we've gotten rid of most of those trees digitally. We hope to show you what we're doing there, as well as some moves we're doing on the facade. And then David and Bill were also very concerned about the eye level view of the pedestrians looking up at the top of the building and the top of the podiums, because they thought when you're standing under the building, there wasn't enough of a gestural feel there. And then finally, strengthen the lobby experience and scale. On 75 Ellery Street, we were asked to focus a little bit more on refining that corner experience as it faces the park. Also look at the corner at the opposite side on the service road where the bike room is and people are crossing from the multi-use path over to there. And then finally, just look at the overall kind of character of the newer moves that we're making and make sure that they're organic in form. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob to cover the open space.
Thanks, BK. I think last time we met, Laura and Linda and Jonathan were definitely present. I think it's fair to say that everyone, including ourselves, were really happy with the overall content of the open space. I think it evolved in a way that solved a lot of your earlier questions, solved some of the programming, started to speak about the interface between the buildings. But primarily, just to refresh everybody's memory, this project is really about creating a much improved streetscape along Dorchester Avenue, Ellery, and then the cross streets. If you remember on the page Plan West or page north here are the railroad yards, Great Western Sunsets, but the middle ground is a little bit less than desirable. And then ground floor retail, primarily facing the parks, as well as Dorchester Avenue and Ellery. And I think there were some very specific comments that BK mentioned. So on the next slide, BK or Lewis, if you want to advance, I think one of the primary comments, and this was Jonathan's, and something that we actually had been toying around with as well, and it was great to hear. So this is the previous slide that we had showed, and Jonathan had asked, and I think maybe others had asked, is there a way for the parks to maybe have a better address or even strengthen their address on Dorchester Avenue? And so we were able to essentially pull out some of the materials, bring some of the kind of seating from the park forward. And I think on the next two slides, you get a better, I think, view of that as well. And so this was the previous image where we held that essentially 20-foot setback for those that remember. The city had asked us to provide a 20-foot offset for any sort of vertical transitions so that Dot Ave becomes multimodal or flying spaceships or whatever it is in the future. We have that setback. And so you can see on this new kind of revised image, we maintain that 20-foot, but we're able to push some of that materiality forward so that as you're walking down Dorchester Avenue, you have a better address with the park. And I think real quickly, BK, if you can go back 2 slides. I think Laura had also, one more, please. Laura had also asked about, is there a way for maybe us to think, can you at least think about this lawn and maybe it flips in its contours? And so if we can study it in the appendix, Laura, but we did some visualization around that and we came back to where we were prior. I think it was a good exercise on our end, but we really liked the way the lawn kind of swept out towards Dorchester Avenue, had a real inviting quality. As you remember, we maintain that kind of peekaboo effect on the western park where there's a kind of earthen berm that allows the park to reveal itself. But we thought at least on Dorchester Avenue, it was important to have it kind of more forward facing and embracing the park. The other item that I think Laura had talked about, and I think her exact word was Eddie, and so we tried to decipher that, was liking the circulation, this kind of looping gesture of the circulation, but felt like this western lawn was a little bit too impenetrable, I think is really where you're going, Laura. And so what we did was help by kind of stretching out some of the seating blocks, provided some stone dust access for the lawn. And so we maintain its kind of original vibrancy and its original, as I said before, that kind of peekaboo quality from the backside, but by elongating those blocks and introducing some alternative paving, allow people, I think, to access the lawn in a slightly more casual way than the precious kind of circle that was there before. So hopefully we heard where you were. If nothing else, I think we like it better. So BK, go ahead.
That you reached a little bit over halfway.
Jeez. Sorry, I'm leaving
No,
BK.
it was me too. We have a lot to cover here tonight. So what we wanted to do was show you some before and afters of some of the different buildings. So this is 505 looking from the park up Ellery. In addition to calming down some of the skin movements, strengthening the strongest ones, we also wanted to look at the massing. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner, we had a wedged shaped massing for the upper floors of the tower. What we decided to do was to kind of pull that back in. And what that does is a number of different things. It helps create a new terrace that is facing east. It opens up the skyline quite a bit as you're looking all the way up Ellery Street from far behind us. And then it also gets the building farther away from 75 Ellery Street, as well as just creating more daylight. Back to the other before and afters, you could see that we've taken that darker skin material on the left side of the building. We've made it the same material as on the rest of the tower part of the building. We've shifted the wedge over so that it's a little bit stronger in relationship to the void to the right side of it. We still wanted to keep that angular gesture just because it harkens back to cranes and iron workers and all of that stuff. And then if I can show you some other views, this is on the south side looking down Ellery Street in the other direction. This was the before, this was the after. So the benefit of the terrace and opening up the view line above the podium, we think was very, very good, as well as some of the other moves that we're making by emphasizing that diagonal. And then from down below, a street level view of the same. This was somewhat contorted before. There was a lot going on in terms of steps, so we were trying to simplify it into a few larger moves. We do still want to keep that different language for the podium that wraps around on Dorchester Avenue, and then another language with variations in it for the tower, because that's what we've been presenting to the community and the elected officials. And we also like the idea of different architecture coming down. You could see it a little bit more clearly here in a series of steps. So this was where we were before. This is with the trees removed, so you could see what was going on at the base of the building. This is the new language, which we think is stronger and more simplified. And then if we zoom in to the podium, this is where we were before. Seth and others were really concerned that we had a kind of a disjunction between the column spacing below and then the podium bay language above. So our new version is this, where the columns are in line with the major bays above. And you can see on the right-hand side, we've pulled back the building to create a better transition for that new open space and plaza that's at the corner of the building where we hope to have a larger tenant. We can come back to this in questions in terms of what's happening at the base of the building, but here, Rob, this is a diagram that just shows you what we were doing. I think we should keep going, Rob, and get back to this if that's okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And then this is another view of the proposed new corner and the steps and the softening of the terrace and the connection to the existing sidewalk or the newer sidewalk. For 65, we did want to show you, this is our title view, we did want to show you what this looked like between 65 and 75 without any of the trees in here, the park trees or other. Lizzie's looking at the second hand on her watch. This is the previous kind of prow of the ship. And what we did here was we decided to push the glass back on the right-hand side near the lobby area. So in this zone, we've removed this water line, which we think was just kind of interfering with things. Then we've redesigned the gunwale, which is this line up here so that it breaks at the breaks that we have. And we've essentially taken the structure of the interior of the ship and we've shown it on the outside of the ship. This is another view of that. And we rendered it at night so it would be particularly kick-ass, but also so that it would show really some of the transparency in the different spaces that you're looking into and how we really think the kind of that undercut and then the complexity of those terraces is going to help. But you could see the skin, how we've kind of improved that. It's not really an exaggeration of it, but we've really tried to put more texture on it, and then the gunwale up at the top. This is a view of on the service road where all of this down below at the base of the ship was simplified. We got rid of the water line. We have some of those textures coming down, and then the gunwale up above you could see is broken. And then finally, I'm going to transition to 5 slides we have for 75. So this are the two buildings speaking to one another. And this is the new 2-story kind of reading expression on 75 on the left-hand side. Again, all the trees have been removed. This was where we started with a 1-story read for a corner food and beverage use, as well as a 2-story read for the lobby. And this is what we're proposing now. So it's a much more organic, stronger gesture that is a 2-story gesture that leads to a 2-story lobby on the left-hand side. And if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see in addition, we have this curved canopy that we've extended out and around, and we have curved the glass on the lower 2 floors of the building just to kind of super emphasize the softness of that architecture. And this leads around to a 2-story lobby space that goes into the building. This is finally the view of the bike room, which we've amped up a little bit so that there'd be a better kind of feeling of the building. And a more inviting feeling as you're crossing the street from the multi-use path. And that's it. How much were we over by, Lizzie?
No worries, just a couple minutes.
Obviously, that was a lot to cover, but we wanted to try and address all of the comments and really sort of show you them all cohesively. So fire away.
It's really great to see this all coming back together. I'm going to make an unusual request. And that is that you start with your first slide and just go through for us. I think of particular import is us just to see the before and after. And I don't know, BK, if I saw a before and after for 65. I saw the after, but maybe I missed the before.
So for 65 or the very first slide of the presentation?
For 65. And I'm sorry, because I was talking, I didn't see the first slide again. Can I ask you guys to go back to the very beginning and just take us through, giving us a couple seconds on each of the slides?
Yep. So this is 65. And this is where you want me to start, correct? This is
Now
the
go all the way back
before.
to the beginning, BK.
All the way back at the
All the way
beginning,
to the
if you don't mind. And just as a caveat, BK, I was saying that I didn't remember seeing a before and after for 65, but that we did see it for the others. And that may just have been me not seeing it.
So this
Could I
image,
also, I'm sorry, BK, could I also ask that when we get to the before and after that you do it twice, before and after, because it's tough to catch. There's a lot going on. It's tough to catch everything that's different.
let me go back to presentation mode if that, okay. So this was what we had shown you previously. And yet we took away the trees that are in the front of this. This does show the new skin on 65. We forgot to remove this tree, which shows the two-story open space at the base of 675. So I'll go through the landscape, unless you want me to stop here as well. Okay, so 505 before, 505 after. And you can see we studied changing this skin on the left-hand side so that it matched this tower skin. And it ended up looking too harsh because the long end of the facades for this particular language, it just didn't feel inviting enough. So instead we changed the coloration of that language. We tightened up the base spacing a little bit so that there'd be a variation on the tower language.
And I will just say this view is sort of we chose this intentionally, the folding back, the pushing back of that angled component. I don't think we can emphasize enough how much that creates a view line and lets sun into Ellery in between the four buildings, right? This building is south and east of that connecting open space. So that subtle move of pushing it back really has a significant amount of added light and air into the middle of the four buildings together. That's why we thought that was a really important, but subtle, but important change.
And some of the base of the building has been simplified so that we didn't have multiple language at the base. We have the same brick that is running across. And creating a nice series of bays and operable windows here for the retailer that run right along that sidewalk, Linda, that you were always concerned about. It's just the trees are diaphanous, but maybe not diaphanous enough.
Yeah.
This
I might
again.
chime in. Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just might chime in quickly to say that I appreciate a lot of the changes, and I think what's exciting to see is I can preserve some of the intent and the sort of the dynamism, but still found a way to sort of clean up some of the language in a way I think is making it still very, very, very compelling and very exciting. So I appreciate a lot of these massing changes, these changes to the massing and the colors.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think you remember I was concerned about the yin yang relationship of these two elements. And by shifting that gesture a little bit over and making it taller and dropping some of the glass on this side, it's subtle, but it does make this the primary thing that your eye is going to rather than the void. And then this just cleaned up so much for us, both in terms of building massing, daylight, and you could see again, the distance that is created between 75 Ellery Street and the facade. You don't have two facades looking at one another that are perpendicular to one another, but we're following the bend in Ellery at the base where it matters for urban design, but not up at the tower. This was a larger series of views where we wanted to show you what was happening here without the trees. And then the alignment or misalignment of the columns. Here it is cleaned up. We still have a little bit of work to do here in terms of canopies and connections, but we've opened this up to just 2 piers so that that could be all glass running all the way across there, looking down to the park.
If you recall, this chunk of the building, we didn't talk about as much. This is where we're hoping to put the grocery. And I know, Linda, you had some questions about, well, groceries aren't necessarily the best facade, right? You got to really manage that. So we really wanted to just try and clean the architecture as much as possible to allow for eating zones and other things that'll give you some transparency into a grocery that is a positive, not the sort of old school negative. So I think this facade and particularly the work done at this corner, to think about that's going to be the entry to the grocery where that chamfered corner is, and really trying to just make it a clean and obvious focal point, knowing how important grocery entry is at the ground plane.
Also, just at the base of the building, Laura, we spent a lot of time, after our last meeting, and we've pulled the ramp a little farther away. We've tried to make the materiality of this terrace fit with the architecture of the building, not be a separate element. There's still, obviously, we've removed all the planting and the trees that are running along here, but it doesn't feel like a barrier the way it was feeling, particularly along this edge previously, and even this edge with the new approach.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but we managed to get that not to be a ramp anymore.
Yeah.
That to me is good. We get rid of all the handrails and we've gotten it graded out. That's what really cleans that up. It's not a ramp anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of cacophony with ramps, for sure.
And this diagram pretty much shows you that.
Yeah, sorry. It's a sloped walk now, which we thought was a significant, we talked, if you remember, Laura, we talked about.
Yeah.
We lost you, Mark.
You're mute.
You got muted, Mark. And then, Rob, is there anything you want to talk to with this?
No, I think Laura's comments were spot on about just simplifying. We had too many ins and outs with the front porch, and whether it's brick or we use the granite water table of the building, but I think it's still a nice connection. Right now, this shows masonry, maybe it'll become granite, but it's a nicer connection between the landscape elements in the building. It still feels very open and public. And I think it was a good suggestion, and it has seemed to kind of turn out pretty nicely in these renderings.
Those steps still great a bit for me, but you're on this very awkward, right? All of those corner connections are always very awkward, like that for buildings as well.
They're better than the kind of 90-degree knife's edge we had in the prior design, and so I think we'll continue to refine that. Maybe they become a little bit asymmetrical.
Yep, I'm wondering the same thing.
Might be a nicer solution.
Because the building's so elegant, and it, that, I don't know, just feels like it just doesn't really, when you notice them, it's too much, right?
Yep.
And by pulling the building back on this side, we were able to ramp down in this direction also. So that was nice because this is sloping up slightly. This is sloping down. So we felt that you got a better connectivity all around that corner.
Yeah.
And you could see here, we worked on this a little bit, trying to get some depth in the facade. There's still going to be a retailer in there, and they're going to be looking over this, and there's a grade change, but we're trying to make it as activated as possible.
I think the other benefit, BK, if you don't mind going back one slide, I think the other benefit in kind of stepping this facade back is that it actually feels like it's bringing in the open space in a new way. It's essentially creating this kind of 3-step reveal, which feels a lot more friendly to the pedestrians. So I think this is really clever.
There's still some architectural areas we are working on resolving that Elizabeth has pointed out. Some of these conditions right here, this condition right here, getting better alignment, even though the materiality might change. So we hope to do that, for our next meeting. And then this was the view of 65 and 75 together without any of the trees that are located right along this edge or in front of the building. And we do think there's a pretty nice relationship, not just at the base of the building, but also with the podiums, the terraces at the tops of the podium speaking to one another and looking into this. And David and Bill aren't here, but we do think by sculpting this gunwale a bit and then bringing that real texture of the inside of the boat to the outside, it's helped a lot in making those longer facades less flat. We did not want to, well, we looked at sculpting those in the same way we had sculpted the tower, but these are really the most important lab floors, those first 6 floors. And so we just wanted to work on the end of the building and not touch the benching area if possible. And so we looked at a number of different ways to do it. And this new texture, we actually thought was really quite nice. It was a nice enough contrast from the base of the building or the hull of the ship up to the sails, which still feel very light. And then the sculpting of the gunwale, we also thought was a good move, as well as getting rid of that horizontal line, the white one that broke everything in half, it seemed like before, at a place where it didn't need to happen.
So there's the before and after, Linda, you were asking, is there one? You were so shocked by BK's curse word there that it.
Yeah, the kick-ass word.
Yeah, exactly. But
well,
there is a before and after.
And I realized that because one's at night, I wasn't comparing apples to apples here.
This facade also we pushed back. Elizabeth was particularly concerned, about this bigger gesture here and then it dying out to a really flat gesture here. And we think she was absolutely spot on. So we pushed that whole facade back, so that this facade down here is out about 2 feet from this one, and this one is in about 2.5 feet from this one. So it does kind of start to bring you around the side of the building into the big 2-story lobby space on this side. But that is what you're looking at, a retail at the corner here. And then amenity space for the tenant that spills out onto this terrace up above, and then tenant space above that. And then a 2-story lobby that cuts deep into the building. And then the series of retail tenants farther down. And then up at the top, you can see what we did.
I know on the previous scheme and in our previous discussion, one of my concerns and comments, I think, was that the building was more interesting on Ellery and the service drive than it was on the park side. And I think that that's completely different now. And maybe it is just because we're looking at this incredibly dynamic evening view, but I think that the changes you've made, kind of even framing what you're calling the gunwale, just creates more depth. Yes, creates more depth and more interest on the park side. So thank you so much for taking those comments.
I mean, this becomes so much more readable as sort of part of that whole corner gesture. It's really nice.
Yeah, and I mean, Lewis and I really like the texture that was created because it's different. These fin textures are very different than what's happening up above, even though they're the same color. And it just makes it feel more solid without it actually being more solid. And then here you see from the same side, we got rid of this horizontal here. We brought these fins, which were representative of water breaking on the bow of the ship, down. We tried to simplify this. And then again, flaring the gunwale at these major corners and then breaking it at our slots, which we probably should have done to begin with. Really, I think helps the feel of the building, long distance and up close. And then finally on 75, so this was what we walked into, I think, subcommittee with. And then we did work on a 2-story gesture, and then we tried to figure out a way to keep it more organic, because the last time there was a little bit too much of a difference between this facade. It had dark mullions previously. I'm not sure that they showed here. But in our previous 2-story space, it had darker mullions. It felt a little too disconnected. it also seemed too chamfered, and you had said everyone said it felt too faceted at that corner. And then we changed the kind of the wave or the rippling of the waters between the lily pads so that it moved down here farther on the facade.
And I will just note there's one last little piece of work that we need to do, because I don't know if you noticed the doors that are shown in the curved glass. That seems unlikely. So the corner entry, when you curve it, right, we'll have to push that to one side or the other. So I just want to acknowledge, in case somebody asks later, you really going to do curved glass doors like that? No, we're not.
They'll be straight, but they might be there, Mark.
I think that this corner is so much more evocative of kind of that organic metaphor of the bloom of the lily pad. I think this is terrific. And also it just feels, I mean, you will see this view from across the street and from the east lawn. And I think that it just creates so much more of a dynamic edge there. Being able to see in through that glass and having that two-story expression is great.
And there's some nice directionality there too, even if we did have the entrance here for a retailer. It's very nice that the building is kind of looking back over the park. And then again, this is just at the bike room where we pulled the building back. We've tried to put some color here and some signage. As you said, bike rooms aren't really retail, but there's something fun that we can do on the inside, but also kind of have it be a little bit more mysterious on the outside. So we're looking at fritting the glass in some fashion as well. Not like the frit up above on the lily pad, but something different.
We didn't talk about this on an earlier rendering, but since it's showing up in this one, I really like this architectural element that comes and terminates the axis of the west lawn, right? Yes, and that came through really clearly on that earlier drawing where you're kind of looking across that lawn, and then you almost have this connection between 65 and 75 coming across there. I think that was really nice, particularly because the lawn is rising up there and your eye is rising up there, and then you want something to really complete that package. And also because, you know, this project isn't going to extend beyond because of the rail yard there. So I think that's a really nice idea.
Yeah, thank you.
So Rob, the architects are stealing all your thunder.
That's all right. All good. I thought our last meeting was really, we had a lot of good thunder last meeting, so happy to let BK curse and other things this time.
Yeah.
It's been a long night.
If we could, any other comments on the building? Because I'll switch gears for a moment and go to the landscape. So, so we're at the end of the slideshow. Go back a few to the bowl in the back. There you go. The changes you made back there.
Yep. Yeah. Keep going. Reversing slides, BK.
Which way am I going, Rob?
Towards the beginning, like maybe
Yeah,
slide 6 or 7.
Yeah.
What are there, 40 slides here?
Yeah.
No, there's only 10.
Right there. Yep.
Yeah, there. Oops.
I know. I clicked too many times. It's coming back.
Great. I think that's a nice solution, Rob. I think it just improves it so much, and it helps to take it out of the language of the other lawn, which I've always had a problem with them feeling too familiar and not giving a sense of place in each of the conditions. So I appreciate that a lot. We have a question about sun
here, though. I can't remember the sun shadow. Is this going to be in sun? Or when is it going to be in sun, I guess?
Yeah, it's almost due west. And so it's actually not quite. It's a little bit the axis is a little bit south of due west, I think. But so in the afternoons, late afternoon, this will be in full sun. And then as BK said, some of the manipulations of the building 505, I think, and cutting back some of the angles of 75. So we'll get some we'll get some morning sun here. Obviously the left side, which is on the north side of building 75, will be, predominantly in shadow, but we get these great slices in the morning and the afternoon. And then the sunsets, as we talked about, like, in the shoulder seasons throughout the summer, at the end of the day, this entire area, both open spaces, is flooded with late afternoon, early evening light, which is really pleasant.
Well, and I wonder if just to make this space not only more comfortable, but also even more different than the other one, if it could support some trees, on this hillock.
Yeah.
So that you give a chance, and it feels much more like you're kind of going into a space, as opposed to kind of being all exposed here.
Yeah. We definitely have. I mean, that might be due the both and concept is there's some wind issues. There's some wind mitigation we need to do on the left side, and so maybe there's a slight concentration of those trees, and they start to find their seedlings start moving to the kind of view right here. I think that could be an interesting solution. Yeah.
And please draw the trees as I have, because they're really beautiful that way. I'm showing my state little education. Okay, then I wanted to go to the other lawn. I'll erase myself.
Yep, I think BK, if you move back 1, 2, 3, 4, one more. Yep.
Okay, I'm actually, you know what, Rob, what might help is to see a plan of this and maybe zoom in on this lawn.
Sure, BK, if you want to go back, I think 1 slide or 2 slides, 1 slide maybe, and you're gonna have to undo presentation view and just zoom in. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm ready to give up on the shaping of this lawn. I kind of wonder if there isn't some opportunity to kind of move the contour. I'm going to draw them so perfectly now you can just trace over it and build it.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if you can, and I know you've got, great stuff going on, but I just can't help but feel that, having some kind of form to where maybe even these trees are sitting on just a little bit of a, rise, so that this starts to feel like a space here, as opposed to a sheet. Right. I think it'll be more inviting, and just give a little more character. A perfectly sloped lawn absolutely has its place, but I think you've kind of moved this design along to where it really, feels inviting, like a place you want to go stay. And I think even just a little hug from the lawn would be nice.
Yeah, I think, if you go, BK, if you go forward 1, 2 slides, Laura can erase her pink Picassos, but I think definitely on the edges. I mean, we've had some conversations around programming. I hope you remember that Core has done a really good job of programming their current space next door. And so we've been talking about whether there be, tents on the lawn, etc. And so we've started to have the conversation about manipulating the grade so that maybe it rises up a little bit quicker, flattens out. But I think you're right. Like if on the left and the right side, there's ways for the lawn to start to contour to embrace that space a little bit more. That might be a nice solution. To give that a rim.
Yeah, I think it's in the, I mean, there's many other solutions or several other solutions than what I did, but I think just adding something to that, even what you've, especially what you've talked about, I think would help.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, AE By and his ability to kind of subtly contour the landscape so that hopefully winter's not totally gone. But when we do get winter, there's kind of this beautiful effect of this lawn being a canvas of collecting pockets of snow and whatnot. And so if that's a possibility here, I think that would be a nice addition.
Yeah, it's also nice with leaves. If you his Soros with leaves is pretty swell.
Yep, definitely.
So those are my comments. Thanks. It's really moved along a long way.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I think you and Linda and John, last meetings, I think the comments were really spot on, and I think have helped, as if we've talked about, I think have pushed the project forward in a meaningful way. So thank you.
I had a couple
I just want to flag for the commissioners that I believe we've lost Commissioner Evans and Commissioner Lubenow. And just
I saw their exit chats.
Yes.
They've had enough.
I had a couple of comments to add to some of the ones we've had along the way. By and large, I think this is just going to be such a fantastic place in Boston. I'm so excited about enlivening Dot Ave in this way and bringing open space in such a clever way as well. My two comments actually have to do with 65 and 75. And the one is about the West Lawn. And I know when we were looking at that just a minute ago, as Laura was going through some of her comments, that, one thing that was missing from that was really this retail component that I think is still going to be on the diagram, right? And that was really compelling when we talked about it last time, the idea that that would be a very active edge, that there might be outdoor seating coming out there. And I imagine it's not showing up today just because we're simplifying the diagram, we're focusing on the open space. But I just wanted to first confirm that that was still the idea.
Yeah, that's a render change, not a program change. We absolutely have that seating and the patio. It was just trying to simplify and clean up the render, but 100% that activation is still there.
That's what I figured. But if we could go back to that earlier diagram, the rendering. One thing that struck me as I was looking at it this time, and maybe the plan is starting to hint at this, but I wonder if there's a way that the active area, the outdoor seating area, the retail kind of spilling out into that space can have a little bit more interaction with the green space itself. Like right now, it looks like you would come out of the retail and kind of have a curbed situation with low plantings. Here I can grab my annotate. So that you come out of the retail here, and then you're kind of met with this curb situation and then the plantings. And I wonder if there can be more kind of permutations into this curbed wall. I think it will be more successful than having this kind of green lawn and kind of edge of that, and then the eating area. So that's just one small comment. And then the other comment I have may be a lot less popular. But I wonder.
Wait a minute. What did you say, Linda?
I think you're overestimating the popularity of the comment you just made, but okay. All right.
Yeah, maybe that comment also was not very popular. But I wonder if we can actually just zoom out almost from where we are in this image. I want to look at 65 and 75 together with the West Lawn in the middle.
That image.
I don't know if we have that view, BK.
I'm thinking about it here.
Well, I think at that first slide.
There it is.
Maybe the first slide.
The
very first slide of the deck. Yeah. So I think what's so nice about the two buildings on Dot Ave is that they have a bit of a language between the two of them. They have these kind of beautiful orthogonal moves. But when we get back to 65 and 75, and we have these very powerful metaphors of kind of the lily pad and then the bloom and then the ship. What strikes me every time I see this view is how orthogonal kind of that gunwale, the prow of the ship is relative to the lily pad bloom. And I wonder if you've ever thought about easing the edge, easing this at, oh,
Same.
oh, it just shifted a little bit. Easing this edge, just thinking about the form of ships and the, you know, the bow and the stern are always eased, and whether that would help to build a kind of visual rapport with these two buildings. And I think the place to do that easing would be kind of with that magenta line, because I think, just as you were saying, BK, that you have this idea of that upper terrace creating a conversation essentially across the green, right? I think that makes a lot of sense, but that corner just has felt a little abrupt to me. And so I'm not sure if you've ever studied easing that a little bit. And if you have studied it, why you kind of set it aside.
No, we studied easing the opposite edge, the side on Service Road, and that's why that is canted back in that direction. This was always the major prow of the ship, so we wanted to get people closer to East Park and West Park. Yeah, it's a tough geometry thing. Is there anything else we can do?
Well, if you go to slide 27, it's worth noting that there's a significant differential between sort of the lead edge of the prow and those corners. They both fold back at least 16 feet. It's a significant fold. It doesn't always show up because of the perspective of this view, but there's a plan differential, and I think you know, having a little plan diagram, which I think David Manfredi had asked for last time, that just shows the shape of that southern edge. Yeah, that line.
It's in a big gesture. I mean, you're talking about that gesture.
I'm talking about that because even on a ship, it is rounded.
This is a double hull catamaran.
All right. So Linda, let us look at it. I think what you're going to find is it's going to diminish that really great view that you have in the lighted rendering where there's this powerful thing in the corner, but I have no problem looking at it. I understand. I don't disagree with what you're seeing. I don't think it will be as successful maybe as what we have, but I hear it, and let us look at it, right? You got to give us something to look at for the next meeting anyway. Let us look at that.
I would appreciate that, and just see if, again, there's more of a conversation between 65 and 75 because of it. Anyway, that was just something I wanted to add to the conversation.
And actually, this plan view I think would be really helpful. Just coming back to your previous comment, which wasn't as popular as you thought it was.
Can I? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to note the spatial difference here, right? The cafe and the activation is really in front of that circle. See, I just think there's less sort of back and forth than you might think, because that circle's pushed further back and the retail is a little in front of it.
Right.
Rob, I'm sure we'll look at it. We can take a look. I just want you to be aware of sort of the spatial difference between sort of the really active retail that's in the first half or the southern half of the open space versus that circle in the back.
You're absolutely right. And I'd forgotten that. And I guess just because we didn't see a view of that in any of the renderings.
Yeah, we had that view in our previous set, but
exactly. We took
limited.
it away. I think we owe you a better, right? We got to bring that view back so you can really see retail and open space in the same diagram at the same level of detail. As you noted, we sort of focused on the open space diagram and didn't merge the two together well. Let us do that next time, because I think it's important that they look and you understand how they work together. We'll bring that to you at commission.
And I think
I'm glad it's still there, and I'm glad they're still thinking about that. And again, you know, even at the ground plane, the idea that you'd have that spill out zone from 65 and the spill out zone from 75, I think will really help to activate the edges of that park.
And that rendering, like not right, a static rendering, the back half of 65 actually kind of deflects or inflects or whatever. So it's not like you're walking directly out of those. If there are doors on that back half of that retail,
Yeah.
you're not walking, you know, face into that kind of planted buffer. You're kind of spilling, you know, to one direction or the other with ample seating under that pergola element that you like so much. So,
Okay, don't leave that view. I have seen something that I haven't noticed before.
oh God.
Are you gonna raise an unpopular comment too, Laura?
Probably.
We can just go get drinks. Like we can just
gonna
meet
go
somewhere.
to the agenda slide now.
Yeah. Turn off your microphones. Which is a couple things. One is, and I know this doesn't match the perspective, but you should pull that back, right? But also,
yeah.
you need some place for feet back there, right? And a place for people to sit and talk.
Yeah.
I mean, to face outward and, you know. And then we haven't talked about this space in ages, but I wonder about this path and this path being different widths. Kind of mean now in their narrowness, and so maybe one is a little wider than the other, but we have more time later, so I'm gonna close my comments with those two snippets.
Okay.
Catherine, I think you're still in the meeting. Anything that you wanted to add before we move to public comment?
I would say that the renderings from the previous meeting to now, I just want to say I'm very appreciative of the changes and taking to heart the comments. I know some were brutal, but you know, hard lessons to learn. But thank you for incorporating as much as you can. You know, this is meant to last, and so the public space in between all of these is crucial to the veins of this neighborhood. And so I really think that you deeply considered that throughout, definitely having places of respite, moments of engagement, as well as people to connect and bond. I think my only thing that will always be a concern is just hiding from the sun on occasion, and what that needs to look like is going to be an ongoing thing, depending on how the sun wants to play hide and go seek. So that's my main thing, is just, you know, even with open field, open space and grass, our sun time can be harsh, and so just thinking about other places of shade, that would be a concern for me. Great job overall.
Christina, do we have any public comments?
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. John, you have your hand raised. You're first.
Thank you. I'd like to first say my name is John Pikatowski, lifelong resident of Andrew Square, South Boston, part of a community activist group and friends with the Andrew Square Civic Association. This project is well received in the Andrew Square area of South Boston. The developer has met with the community at large numerous times. I've heard words from visionary to respect for the historical importance of the area. I'm amazed at the tweaks, and I'm amazed at your ability, Laura, Catherine, and Christina. There's so much to see here. I've literally sat through 5 presentations, and every time I pick up something new, it's amazing. And the tweaks that are happening, BK Bowley, you refer to the yin yang, but that work, that tweaking is really awesome on the facade. I just can't say enough. I live 500 feet away from this project. This is what the area needs. And again, as was mentioned to me, the word visionary is key here. The owner had foresight that nobody else in the area would even dream of. But with that, I'd like to say this is a well-respected project in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Commissioners, at this time, I don't see any additional hands raised. Do we have consensus for next steps for this project?
That was a really nice way to end the meeting. Kudos to the team. I feel comfortable sending this to the full commission. How do others feel about it?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Commissioner Evans also chatted me that he would feel comfortable before he jumped off. So wanted to add his perspective.
Great. All right. Sounds like we'll see you all in
weeks.
full commission.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very much
much.
for the
Thank you
comments.
so much.
you.
Thanks for the help.
Thanks, everyone. I think with that, commissioners, we can call this one wrapped at 7:55 p.m.
Thank
Thanks to all for your time, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.